Okay, it's time for another book review. I'm back on track again. Been doing more reading lately, so I have some more fuel for the fire. The intellectual fire, not book burning fire. I should make that clear. This is Innocence Lost by Carlton Stowers. The true story of a quiet Texas town and the cold blooded murder committed by its kids. And of course, this happened in the Dallas Fort Worth area, so I'm always interested in stories that happen in my area. And this is one I can remember from when I was a kid. This was published in 1990. Uh, this appears to be the first, possibly only edition. So, first, quick summary of kind of my memory and my recollection of this. Um, I I think I would have been about beginning ninth grade when this happened, and I remember very vividly at the time because it was a really weird, uh, tragic story. That I shouldn't say weird; it was more just barbaric. That these kids at a high school in Midlothian, Texas, had figured out that they had a police officer posing as a high school student to inform on some of the drug activity at the school. So these kids took this guy out under the guise of some kind of drug deal going down and then shot him in the head. So that happened in the fall of 1987, and I remember hearing about that at the time, and there wasn't just a whole lot of information out then, but I remember it being a really tragic case. This young guy, and I think he was only 21 years old, and I kind of forgot about it until the other day. I was walking through Half Price Books, and of course, as I am wont to do, I looked in the true crime section to see if there's any other gems, and this jumped out at me. Innocence Lost. I thought, oh, that's interesting, and then I saw this dude's picture, and I was like, oh, that's that guy. Well, I almost put it back on the shelf because I figured I knew the story, and then flipping through the book really quick, I found this picture, which I'm not sure how well you can see that, but that's a picture of some satanic graffiti in a house that was used for ritual activity by some of the perpetrators of this. And I thought, isn't this interesting? So now I got to get it. So got it and read it, and it's definitely from the perspective of just a good book to read, especially being growing up in and around Dallas. This was definitely interesting because Midlothian is a suburb of Dallas, more of a country town, kind of south, almost due south of Dallas, kind of southwest of Dallas proper. And one of the interesting things, before I really dive into this, one of the things that caught my attention in that is this matches the area that I have some friends who grew up in that area who have also reported a lot of strange occult activity, a lot of dead pets and things that seem to have been ritually killed. A lot of weird stuff has happened in Midlothian. Also, Midlothian has a giant cement plant, which is kind of infamous in its environmental impact on that area. So there's a lot of rumors that that's created a lot of birth defects or a lot of other issues, health issues in that part of Texas. So it was against that backdrop that I picked up this book, and it did not disappoint. Just if you are following my channel for a lot of this kind of material and you followed the Dave McGowan treatments of a lot of the serial killers and things like this, there's a lot that will jump out at you in this book. And you'll see I have dog-eared it liberally throughout. One of the first things that jumped right out was the drug problem and how big of a drug problem they had in this relatively small town. I think at the time they said the population was only like 7,000 people, but a lot of the kids were going into Dallas and picking up drugs and bringing it back down. It was a disproportionately large drug problem for the size town, at least it seemed from my reading. Now, first and foremost, one of the things I wanted to bring up to this audience is the two main cops involved in this have an interesting history. It's Roy Vaughn was the chief of police, And the main detective on the case, I believe, is a guy by the name of Fowler. I think it's George Fowler. Let me just double check that. It was Roy Vaughn and Billy Fowler were the two main cops. Now, here's the interesting, many of you will find this interesting, is so Roy Vaughn, if you Google him, he was involved in a suit against New Line Cinemas, I believe, for smearing his name for defamation, for saying that he had some involvement in the Kennedy assassination. So I found that really interesting. And what his, I wouldn't say what his alleged involvement is he's the guy that was on guard duty at the courthouse when Jack Ruby slipped in and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And there were a lot even in the police department that had accused him, and this is all in the book, that had accused him of possibly being in on some kind of plot because he was very conveniently away from where he was supposed to be guarding when Jack Ruby slipped in. So that's really interesting. And the author takes the approach of, this is just this weird little bit of history about this particular guy. And you're like, okay, yeah, that is some fascinating trivia. But then Billy Fowler, the detective on the case, he also had a connection to the Kennedy assassination. If any of those of you who know your assassination history will know the name, I think it's J.D. Tippit was the police officer that was killed allegedly by Oswald, and Billy Fowler was J.D. Tippit's partner. So make of that what you will. I thought that was a really interesting, again, whether or not these things really make a big difference in the big grand scheme of things, I don't know. But I find that really interesting that these two guys both had a direct connection to the Kennedy assassination, and that's really interesting. So Billy Fowler, of course, wound up leaving the Dallas Police Force after, I think, a couple of decades, and then moved on. So anyway, some interesting history there behind those two guys. Now, again, does that mean they're involved in some nefarious plot? That's not really what I'm getting at, but I do find it interesting that already right out of the gate, you have two of the main characters with some very interesting pasts. So there's that. Then there's the city of Midlothian and all of its lore about alleged witchcraft and things like that. And alleged corruption. That's talked about that too, that the previous chief of police before Roy Vaughn and some of his, that he supposedly turned a blind eye to some of the crime happening. So at any rate, you're introduced to there's 3 or 4 main kids that are involved in the shooting of this officer. I think two of them are now serving 45 years. They're on the tail end of a 45-year sentence. But I don't know what kind of sentences some of the others got. But the interesting thing is one of the kids, Richard Gogline, I think I'm saying that name right, he had actually had to move away from Williams, Arizona, because of some of his occult involvement there. That got him in so much trouble that his parents opted to pull him out of school and move him to Dallas to get him away from that. And one of the stories they tell in here is prior to his move to Dallas or to Midlothian, he had actually been involved in a brutal attempted murder on another student with a baseball bat. So lots of stuff like that. Lots of usually when I dog-ear pages, it's because it's giving out specifics about names, dates, places, specific cases that you could also look up. So this kid almost had kind of a Manson-esque quality to him of getting other kids to cooperate in stuff they probably otherwise wouldn't have. So there's some really interesting behavior there. Now the occult angle by the end of the book is really kind of downplayed, and it's treated more as something that one of the kids' defense attorneys tried to bring up to kind of distract the court from the real subject matter. So again, that's one of those things I would suggest if you're into this, read it. I'd be curious, anyone else who's read up on this case, I'd love to hear your 2 cents on this. But bottom line, really tragic case. Terrible that this guy had to lose his life over this, but it really is a snapshot of teen life. And for those people that think satanic panic and all that, this is a good snapshot of what was actually happening during that period, and that it wasn't satanic panic. I lived through that age, and I remember having a lot of friends that were into Satanism. So there was a very real countercultural push to get into Satanism in that period of time. So it's kind of funny when I run into other people my age that seem to have amnesia about some of that time. Especially, the funny thing is, I actually have friends who are some deeply involved in the occult and will poo-poo the whole idea of satanic panic, or say that was all satanic panic, when they themselves were involved in some of that stuff back during that time frame. So I always find that kind of strange. But anyway, so overall, interesting book. Lots of really interesting tie-ins with there's a lot of edges of other things overlapping in this book. So again, if you're into that, I highly recommend it. Overall, if you're not, it's still a good read. It's definitely a page turner. Even when you know the outcome of the story, just the way all these kids wind up interacting and how this all unfolds is all interesting. And especially knowing that area of Midlothian and knowing that some of the occult activity that was documented down in that area, that much more interesting. And it does make me wonder, I really want to follow up with some of my friends now that grew up in that area and see how much of this they remember from their perspective and how much they have to add to what was or was not happening down there. So anyway, there you go. Innocence Lost. Fascinating story, very tragic story of an undercover cop getting shot by students. So there you have it. Innocence Lost by Carlton Stowers from 1990.